There have been multiple phone calls made to the juror's phone number, and there's no response, and she's still not here, and it's 27 after 9.
Your Honor, with the utmost respect for the court's time and everything else about the fact that this trial is ongoing, I would respectfully suggest that we wait one more hour. And the reason I do that, Your Honor, is the following. We have now, if we don't, we've already lost 2 of the total. We don't know if this is simply a flat tire, and she's getting help getting the flat tire changed. We can speculate all day long about what the possible reasons is. But, Your Honor, I think in light of the fact that this case will go on into next week, and we're going to have a three-day weekend of sorts, that they won't be back for 3 days in a row. I'm very nervous about, as you pointed out earlier when we were picking a jury, we're losing jurors at a little bit of an alarming rate if we in fact excuse this one now. I would ask simply one more hour. If you hear nothing or we get nowhere in an hour, then we plow forward and we're down to 1 alternate at that point. And that to me is scary in itself, but if that's the case, that's the case. I just think it would be a little bit premature. We just don't know what happened. And so if we give it 1 more hour, I think that's appropriate, Your Honor.
I'm fine with waiting an hour, if the court agrees.
Judge, I would move at this point to proceed with the trial. We have witnesses, including a witness who's from out of town, from California, who needs to get out of here today. And so I understand this, but we asked to seat, when we initially lost the first alternate, before we ever started, we asked to seat the other alternate. They opposed that.
The problem was, as I mentioned on the record, that once they were relieved from their service, they were not obligated to follow the court's instructions anymore. So that posed the problem. Right,
for that one. I'm not being critical, Judge. I'm just sort of going through the history of this. And we have 1 alternate left. And I don't, so I'd move that we proceed and strike this juror after an hour and 10 minutes of her not showing up.
We're going to start at 10.
All right, Judge. And if she's not here, okay, great.
I just got a message she's on her way.
Okay, all right. There you go.
Do we know how long she is? Hang on, let me check on that. She was having car problems. She's on her way. You didn't cause that.
I didn't know you. I didn't know.
And can I step outside and let our witnesses know?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'm trying to gauge if she's like 5 minutes, 10 minutes away or something.
All right, great, Judge. I'll wait to find out that before I go tell them.
Do I remember correctly? Mr. Audio had finished his cross-examination of the witness, but Mr. Bregman, you had cross-examination? Were you-
Oh, he had not finished.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
finishing
that's
up.
right, you were,
Just probably 10 or 15 more minutes, Your Honor.
okay. But you started cross,
Yes.
and Mr. Bregman, you'll have cross?
I don't know.
Judge, and I have researched the issue that you asked, and I think it's in the court's discretion. I think it's in the court's discretion, although there really isn't a lot of case law or anything on it, quite frankly. So.
And I'm not sure if I understood what the state was bringing to the court's attention, because I know of no authority that dictates on cross-examination which attorney goes first.
Right, and I could find nothing like that.
But then you brought up another issue,
Right.
which was making it sound like they were going to break up their defense and how they were presenting their witnesses in their case.
Correct, Judge.
But I don't think there was a misunderstanding there, because what I indicated was one attorney would go, or one defendant would present, and then the next defendant would present.
That makes sense, Judge. Yes, that's correct. Okay.
You may be seated. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I didn't swear you up for today. Do you swear for to tell the truth and nothing but the truth when you come up with your
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name for the record.
Officer Nathan Render.
You may proceed.
And Your Honor, if you'd switch it to podium VGA, that would be wonderful. Good morning, Officer Rinder.
Good morning.
We left off yesterday talking about some of the evidence that you actually collected in this case. And based on your collection and review of the evidence in this case, you're aware that 2 taser shotgun rounds were fired at Mr. Boyd, is that correct?
Correct.
And if you could, please explain how a taser, what the projectile is that's actually fired from a taser shotgun.
It's a small projectile that consists of a front end that has barbs designed to stick to whatever it's comes in contact with. There's the back end of the projectile is connected to the front end by wires, and it contains all the circuitry, battery, and everything, and is designed to break off and kind of hang down to kind of contact and complete the circuit.
Okay, and is it fair to say that that item you've just described, the actual, it's called an X-rep probe?
Correct.
And in this case, 2 X-rep probes were actually recovered, is that correct?
Correct.
One was recovered at the scene,
Correct.
and one was transported to OMI, essentially, is that correct?
I believe it was in the clothing, or mixed in with the clothing that was sent to OMI and subsequently
Okay,
returned.
based on your understanding, that X-rep probe was, as you've stated, attached to Mr. Boyd's clothing. Is that fair?
I don't know if it was attached. All I know is that it was returned from OMI with the clothing that we provided to them.
I'd like to show you what has been marked as, for identification purposes, as Defendant's Exhibit E16. Can you please describe what's depicted in that photograph?
Is that Defendant Perez, E16?
Yes, Your Honor, I'm sorry.
It's an X-rep projectile with the indicator P1.
Okay. And is that a fair and accurate representation of the X-rep projectile that was marked as P1?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move Defendant Perez's Exhibit E6.
No objection to that.
No objection.
E6, Defendant Perez's E6 is admitted.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that was E16.
Yes, yes, correct, Your Honor. And if you'll switch it to the podium again, it doesn't look like it's coming up, Your Honor. Oh, there we go. Well, it's there for a second.
Do you want VGA or podium?
VGA, please. There we go. And if you'll clear this screen, Officer Rinder, by just tapping the lower left corner.
It's the start menu button in the lower left.
Okay. There you go. So I'm going to pull up Defendant Perez's Exhibit E16 for you to take a look at on that screen. And does this, if you could in this photograph, please indicate where that X-rep probe is located, and you can mark on that screen.
So right there is the front end of the projectile with the wires connecting to the rear portion.
Okay, so that entire device there is one X-rep probe that was fired from the taser shotgun.
Correct.
I'm going to hand you what has been marked as Defendant Perez's Exhibit E17. What is depicted in this photograph?
It's the X-rep projectile indicated as P1 at the crime lab.
Okay, and is that a fair and accurate representation of the X-rep probe marked as P1 as it was photographed at the crime lab?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move Defendant Perez's Exhibit E17.
No objection to that.
Exhibit E17 is admitted.
And if you'll clear your screen, Officer Rinder. And is this a photograph of the X-Rep probe that was taken at the crime lab?
Yes.
Okay. And this is the entire probe as it was fired from the shotgun, is that correct?
Yes.
And 2 of these probes were fired at Mr. Boyd, is that correct?
Correct.
And despite the fact that 2 of these probes were fired at Mr. Boyd, you didn't uncover any evidence that these probes actually had their intended effect on Mr. Boyd, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, I'd briefly like to, the state talked to you briefly about the clothing, the layers of clothing that Mr. Boyd had on, but I wanted to be very sure that I'm clear on how many layers Mr. Boyd had on. At the time of the shooting, Mr. Boyd had on a white t-shirt, is that correct?
Correct.
He had on a gray long sleeve t-shirt, is that correct?
Correct.
He had on a black v-neck t-shirt, is that correct?
Correct.
A red long sleeve t-shirt?
He's red and gray, yes.
Okay. And then a gray hooded sweatshirt.
Correct.
So Mr. Boyd had 5 layers of clothing on his upper body at the time force was used against him.
Correct.
And on his lower body, Mr. Boyd had a pair of black slacks, correct?
Correct.
Black pants, if you will.
Correct.
A pair of black and gray athletic pants, correct?
Correct.
A pair of silver athletic shorts.
Correct.
And a pair of gray athletic shorts, is that correct?
Correct.
So at least on the upper portion of his legs, he would have had 4 layers of clothing on, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, you mentioned that you had an opportunity to actually go to the scene of this incident, correct?
Correct.
And you walked around the scene of that incident, correct?
Correct.
And you were there before evidence markers were applied to the evidence, correct?
Correct.
You were there after evidence markers were applied, correct?
Correct.
And you were there after the evidence was actually collected, is that correct?
Correct.
It's fair to say that you're quite familiar with where this incident actually took place, is that correct?
Correct.
I'm going to hand you what has been marked as Defendant Perez's Exhibit E28 for identification purposes. Please explain what is depicted in that photograph.
It's a photograph of the open space area where the incident occurred, toward the south looking north.
Okay, and is that a fair and accurate representation of the photograph that was taken of the incident, or the location where the incident took place?
Correct.
Your Honor, I move Defendant Perez's Exhibit E28.
Any objection?
No.
Your Honor, just object on the foundation of exactly just to orient us on where this photograph is and what direction it's facing and all of that stuff.
I think you did that, but I'll just ask you to repeat the question.
Officer Render, which direction was the camera facing when this photograph was taken?
It was towards the north.
Okay. So someone was standing, the photographer of this picture was standing in the south and took a photograph looking north, correct?
Correct.
Is that sufficient, Your Honor?
Any objection there?
No objection.
Defendant Perez's E28 is admitted.
Now I'm going to bring up that photograph on the screen next to you. And is this the photograph you just reviewed?
It is.
So this is a photograph.
Excuse me, Your Honor, this is a different photograph than we have in our exhibit binder, this photograph.
Can you compare, please?
I'm sorry. Let me see. Pull the wrong tab. I'm sorry, Your Honor, the state does object to this one. This one is taken after the dog had taken the Boyd from the bag from Mr. Boyd, and it is not an accurate depiction of how it looked at the time of the moment of the shooting, as shown in the still shots. So under 401, 402, and 403, and lack of foundation about this specific photograph, I object.
The objection's overruled, and you may address this difference on cross-examination or redirect.
Yes. I'm going to bring up that photograph one more time, Officer Render. This if you would, for the jury, please describe what is depicted in this photograph.
Again, it's the open space area looking north. You can see at the top the rock with the impacts we talked about yesterday. The large amount of belongings, again, at the north end of the scene. The small plant the X-Rep projectile was located next to, and various other items.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier that you've had an opportunity to review Officer Perez's helmet camera in this case, correct?
Correct.
And when you were reviewing that helmet camera, you saw Mr. Boyd drop a bag prior to the shooting, is that correct?
Correct.
Can you please identify that bag that he dropped?
It's the blue bag at the bottom of the photograph.
Okay, and was there another bag that he dropped prior to the shooting?
There may have been, I just know specifically the blue bag.
Okay, so you remember the blue bag. Do you remember him dropping the bag that is depicted here?
That I don't remember.
Okay. I'm going to hand you another photograph which has been marked for identification purposes. Defendant Perez's exhibit number 27. Please explain what is depicted in that photograph.
Again, it's a photograph of the open space area where the incident occurred at. Further east of the scene, looking west.
Okay. So where was the photographer who took this picture standing when the photograph was taken? Roughly, just what direction were they looking?
They were looking to the west.
Okay. And is that a fair and accurate representation of the scene as it was after the March 16, 2014 incident?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move Defendant Perez's exhibit 27.
Objection, Your Honor.
Defendant Perez, E27 is admitted.
Now, I've brought that photograph up on the screen next to you. And so this is a photograph that is essentially near where that rock, where the impact marks were on that rock that you just pointed out to us. Is that correct?
I believe that rock is off to the right
Okay.
of the photograph.
Okay. And this photograph is facing west, correct? Kind of in the southwest direction?
It would take a little bit.
Okay. And to the west of this area, there is a neighborhood, correct?
Correct.
And there is also, can you identify where the trail is in this photograph?
The trail.
The main
Up to-
trail that ran along under this, where the incident took place.
It's like a dirt road trail along that direction.
Okay.
E27.
27?
Yes. Now, Officer Render, as part of the investigation in this case, Officer Dominic Perez was processed for evidence. Is that correct?
Correct.
And in fact, he was processed for evidence at approximately 9:04 p.m. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the shooting in this case, as you understand it, occurred at roughly 7:30 p.m.
Correct.
So from the time the shooting occurred until the time Officer Perez was processed for evidence, approximately 90 minutes elapsed, correct?
Correct.
And when Officer Perez was processed at approximately 9 o'clock, an SD card was collected from the helmet camera Officer Perez had on his person. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that SD card contained a video that captured the entire use of force, the actual use of force incident against Mr. Boyd. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And as you understand the charges that have been brought by the state in this case, Officer Perez's video captures what the state contends is the murder of James Boyd. Is that correct?
Correct.
Despite the fact that Officer Perez videotaped what the state claims was an unlawful use of force against Mr. Boyd, Officer Perez willingly turned over the video that captured that incident. Is that correct?
Correct.
And he waited an hour and a half to turn in that video of the incident. Is that correct?
Correct.
And throughout your entire investigation in this case, Officer Perez did nothing to hamper your investigation. Is that correct?
Excuse me, Your Honor, give us a vote.
Little,
Do you remember the question?
Officer Perez did not hamper my investigation in any way.
And Officer Perez was completely compliant with your entire investigation. Is that correct?
Yes.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
yeah.
Now, Officer Rinder, you would agree with me that there was nothing else Officer Perez could have done to assist you in investigating the March 16th, 2014 incident. Is that correct?
Not in my investigation, I don't believe so.
Okay. No further questions, Your Honor.
Very briefly, very briefly. That night, as part of the investigation, Mr. Sandy was asked to turn in his video card, correct?
Correct.
And he did that, didn't he?
Correct.
Okay. And Mr. Sandy at no time did anything to hamper your investigation, did he?
No.
Okay. I don't have anything else, Your Honor. Thank you.
You good?
Detective, yesterday you were asked some questions about the processing of the scene, and I want to make sure that I'm clear and heard a little bit about this morning. When you processed the officers, did you process them in any particular order?
I mean, when they started processing, I was not in the crime van. I was in the briefing, and they were just brought in.
All right. And so when officers' firearms are processed, it's based in the order in which they're processed, not based on the order in which shots were fired. Is that right?
Objection leading, Your Honor.
Little,
They're processed in the order they are brought into the van.
All right. So in your report, Mr. Perez's firearm is firearm what?
Correct.
Is firearm 1? Is that right?
It's indicated as F1, F standing for firearm.
What was Officer Sandy's firearm indicated as?
F2.
And just to be fair, that's just the order they were processed. It's not an indication of who fired first. Is that right?
That is correct.
In fact, you were asked a lot of questions about the processing of the scene based on your collection of the evidence. What did you determine? Who was the first one to fire 3 shots?
Officer Sandy.
Who was the next one to fire 3 shots?
Officer Perez.
Did anyone else fire from their rifles that day?
Not from any lethal force.
Okay. And you were asked about mace. Was the mace can empty that Mr. Boyd had?
Yes.
And we also talked about the X-reps. Is that right?
Correct.
Based on your review of the evidence, Detective, wasn't it less than a second after Detective Sandy shot at Mr. Boyd that a beanbag shotgun was on its way up to the scene?
Objection leading.
Well, can you tell me how long was it, based on your report, after Officer Sandy shot Mr. Boyd before the beanbag shotgun arrived at the scene?
It was probably a few minutes,
Okay.
maybe less. I don't know.
Right. Would it refresh your recollection to look at your report?
Yes.
And in your report, did you prepare a timeline?
A summary of the video.
I'm starting right here, and you can just read it to yourself, and we'll ask you questions at the time of the shot. And the time of the beanbag. that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
How long was it between the time Mr. Sandy shot and the time Officer Ornelas arrived with the beanbag shotgun?
Approximately 30 seconds.
You were asked some questions about Defense Exhibit E28. Do you remember that with Mr. Boyd's bag?
Is that the one looking from south to north? Yes.
Yes. Based on your review of the video and collection of the evidence, is your understanding that the canine officer took that bag from Mr. Boyd? Is that right, the blue bag, the Quest bag?
Objection leading, Your Honor.
I don't believe it was intentionally taken.
Sure. Did the dog take the bag before Mr. Boyd was shot?
I believe the canine did grab the bag.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 48D, Your Honor, may I have the podium? Thank you. Would you agree with me that all of the debris that's on Defense Exhibit E28 is not depicted on the shooting video?
Can you go back to the other one?
You bet.
Yeah, I'm going to object just based on a different angle.
The witness can answer the question.
I do not see it in that photograph.
Okay. In this angle photograph that the defense showed you, E28, there's quite a slope, it appears, there in between, or on that photo. Is that right? Down here?
There is a slope, yes.
Did you make any effort to measure the slope?
It was captured in the 3D scan, but I don't know what the angle was.
Okay. We have defense, can we have defense table VGA on?
HDMI.
Oh, I'm sorry, HDMI. This is a still from the defense recreation of the scene. Maybe. Is it on yours computer?
No.
Let's try it. We'll try an old school, Judge. Let's try, do you want to try plugging this one right here? Because maybe it's our plug.
I don't have a VGA cable. Do you want to just try?
Yeah.
Here.
I don't know if that will work, but sure. Oh, it's quite a glare. Yep, nope. Let's try.
Here.
Yep.
Can we try HDMI podium?
There we go. Say still shot from the defense recreation of the scene. Do you agree that this showing a slant or a slope in between Mr. Boyd and these depicted officers, Weimer, Skirch, and Sandy?
Yes.
All right. And there's an area just north of the scene. Do you see where that clearing is?
Over off to the right, in that area?
Yes, exactly. Is that a flattened area right there?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Have a moment, Your Honor. All right. Detective Renner, you were also asked a lot about what you...
Sorry, Your Honor, can we just move the admission of that which they just showed, please? Since they showed it
Oh, sure.
to the jury. Can we move the admission?
Sure. Yes.
What did you want to label that as? We have it labeled the overall.
You know what? I'd like to wait on that because we'll use it to cross the person who created it.
Yeah, I'm gonna, can we approach them? I've got a problem with that. Yes.
It will be 74, because there is a second.
Detective, as the prime criminalistics detective of this scene, you were asked a lot of questions about you collected clothing. Is that right?
Yes.
You also talked about locating the impact rock where the bullets from Mr. Sandy's rifle hit. Is that right?
I identified them as bullet impacts. I don't know whose rifle they were
All right.
from.
You did not make any attempt to figure out whose rifle they were from. Is that right?
Correct.
Even though you had the video that showed you where the officers were located. Is that right?
Objection leading, Your Honor.
Did you have the video that showed you where the officers were located at the time of the shooting?
I had a video showing the scene at the time of the shooting, yes.
All right. On the video, did you locate any areas that would help you identify where the officers were standing at the time of the shooting?
The general area, yes.
You also did you have markers at the scene that would help indicate where the officers were standing at the time of the shooting?
Markers is in...
Any sort of markers at the scene to indicate to you where the officers were standing at the time they shot?
There was evidence to indicate the general area where they were standing, yes.
Was there blood evidence to indicate where Mr. Boyd was at the time of the shooting?
There was blood on the ground.
Okay. Based on all of that information that you had at APD as the prime criminalistics detective, you made no effort to exclude the possibility of whether one rifle could have fired certain shots at Mr. Boyd or the other. Is that right?
Objection leading.
Based on all of that evidence, did you make any attempt to rule in or rule out whether one officer standing where he was could have possibly fired certain shots at Mr. Boyd based on the location of where Mr. Boyd was fired upon?
I did not know.
Your Honor? Your Honor, the state has their made witness be excused.
Thank you. State and call their name.
Thank you. Your Honor, the state would call Michael Lynette. And can we put back on the overhead, Judge, please?
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth and nothing but the truth under penalty of death?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Please state your name and spell it for the record.
I'm Michael Monette. First name is Michael, and last name Monette.
You may proceed.
And Michael Monette is how you pronounce your name?
Yes.
Because we've had all different kinds of pronunciations in this trial. Were you one of the two CIT officers who responded to the scene where James Boyd was on the mountainside on March 16th of 2014?
Yes, I was.
Were you dispatched at 5:05 shortly after the encounter with the open spaces officers?
Yeah, approximately that.
And was it an hour and 10 minutes later when you were pulled off from negotiating with Mr. Boyd?
Yes, approximately that seems correct.
Okay. We're going to talk about what happened during that hour and 10 minutes, but before we do that, I'd like you to try to explain to the jury what a CIT officer is.
Well, the CIT officer has special extra training on how to deal with individuals in crisis or have any mental disabilities.
Okay. Does an officer with APD have to apply to go get extra training to be a CIT officer?
Yes, they do.
How long had you been on the force as of the time of this shooting in 2014?
I believe around 5 years.
When was it that you asked to have special training to be a CIT officer?
I believe it's around September 2010.
Why did you want to be a CIT officer?
It was something that kind of interested me. It was something that I thought I'd be able to do and excel at, so I just was really interested in it.
All right. Can you tell the jury what kind of training a CIT officer has that people don't get in the academy?
Well, you get a lot of de-escalation techniques. You get a lot of background on numerous mental disabilities, and you get the training of how to interact with those people and how to be able to interact with them and actually, have the best interaction you can with them compared to a normal officer that might not have those tools to be able to speak to them and interact correctly with them.
Okay, now, before you had CIT training, had you ever worked with mentally ill or homeless people before in any other job?
Not in any other job, no.
All right. What kind of training do they give you about dealing with homeless and mentally ill citizens in the CIT training?
Just getting to understand the numerous different mental disabilities that there are. We're not experts at it, but we're given the training into it. And basically, we got a 40-hour block of everything that had to do with that, along with some scenario training also that we did.
All right. Did you receive training on whether the homeless population is at greater risk of being victims of crime than someone that has a home?
Objection. 4-1.
Join Your Honor.
Did you get training in what kinds of risks homeless people themselves are exposed to?
Yes, we did.
Objection, Your Honor. 4-1.
I'll allow the answer to stand. Please move on.
All right. And are you aware, just from being a law enforcement officer, of the kind of risks that homeless people are subjected to themselves?
Yeah, from the job day to day, yes.
Right. And did they train you about why homeless people might feel...
Objection,
Can I finish my question, Judge?
Let me ask you to phrase it in non-enumerated.
Sure. Did you receive training about whether it was unusual for homeless?
Objection leading.
I'm going to sustain with the way that the question's being asked or phrased.
Okay. What kind of training did you receive on whether it is unusual or not unusual for homeless people to carry weapons for their own safety?
I don't know if we're necessarily trained on if they are likely to carry them or not. But from my experience as an officer, it's not unlikely for them to have some sort of weapon on them.
Okay. What kinds of weapons, in your experience, do homeless people sometimes have?
Usually,
Section R 401, 403.
Objection.
Go ahead.
usually there can be knives, maybe like a little bat or some blunt object, or even like razor blades.
Okay. Is it usual or unusual for them to be able to afford firearms?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Join, Your Honor.
Can homeless people usually afford body armor or bulletproof vests?
Relevance, Your Honor.
Join.
Sustain.
What training did you receive about whether a large percentage of the homeless population also might be suffering from mental illness?
Just that it is very likely for them to have a mental disability.
Why is that?
Mostly because once you get a mental illness like that, it's very difficult to maintain a job and maintain relationships, or to have those relationships last a long period of time until they kind of, in a sense, kind of give up on them or might lose their support system.
Okay. And what kind of people can be afflicted with mental illness or dementia?
Pretty much anybody can.
Is anybody immune from getting a mental illness?
Not that I know of, no.
Lawyers, judges?
Objection, relevance, Your Honor.
Join.
Okay. People suffering from different, well, were you trained on whether or not people suffering from different types of mental illness may respond in different ways?
Yes, we were.
Okay. Did you receive training in dealing with people who are suffering from the disease of paranoid schizophrenia?
Yes, we did.
And what did you learn about that?
Just they could be, real erratic. Emotions go up and down. They can also maybe hear or see things that might not be actually happening or going on, along with most of the other side effects that are pretty common.
Okay, and how did they teach you to deal with somebody who was suffering with that kind of disease?
Basically, you want to ask them flat out, are you seeing or hearing anything that might not be there or might not be something that I could hear or see? And along with that, just learning how to communicate with them, trying to see what kind of problem that they might be having and what might be the main reason why we're out there, and just trying to do it in like a non-threatening type of manner.
Do people suffering from schizophrenia have any problem being touched, physically touched?
From what I understand, they can.
Okay. And what kind of response can they have if you try to touch them?
They might get irritated or get further agitated.
Okay, excuse me just a second, Judge, I forgot one thing I need to ask you about. As part of your training, were you made aware of the Albuquerque procedural orders on, that are given to all officers on dealing with the mentally ill?
Yes.
And were you aware of what State's Exhibit 2, response to the mentally ill, suspected mentally ill, and people in crisis procedural order?
Yes.
Is this, who gets this SOP?
Well, if it's in the SOP, basically every officer gets a copy of it.
All right, does it apply just to CIT officers or to all officers?
Basically would apply to all officers.
All right. If I can put this on the screen, Judge, this has already been admitted into evidence. I want to ask you about whether all officers are given instructions on how to handle somebody who's mentally ill and what instructions they're given as far as avoiding touching them?
Well, the instruction that they would get would have to come through the academy training. That's kind of the basics of a CIT, what a CIT officer would do.
All right. And what does the SOP tell them about whether they should try to avoid physical contact with the mentally ill person?
Basically, where it says there on number 4, it says avoid physical contact if possible while assessing the situation.
Okay. And does it also provide just the average street officer with a guide on how to communicate with the subject in this particular SOP?
Yes.
And let's go over that again. This is under D, communicating with the subject. What is the average officer taught about that?
Well, as it says right there, providing a reassurance that the police officers are there to help and to provide whatever care might be necessary for the subject.
Okay, let me stop you right there, because do you, in addition, have special training on how to do this particular thing when you're at the scene?
Yes.
And that comes with your CIT training?
Correct.
Okay. What else are they taught to do?
To basically attempt to try to find what's bothering the individual, basically trying to get to know them and see what's causing them to be in a crisis or might be their mental disability.
Right. And do you then have special training in that particular skill?
Yes.
And then number 3.
Basically, this one is just allowing the subject to ventilate whatever type of, whatever he's feeling or whatever kind of emotions he has going on, or whatever kind of crisis he's in, while trying to kind of figure out what's bothering him.
All right. And how do you physically do that? Like, if I were the person who was having the issue, what would you be asking?
I'd be asking what's going on today. What have you been doing today? Basically just trying to assess them. See what they're going through, see what they're trying to communicate to you. At the same time, they might be a little agitated, they might be upset, but as long as they're being non-threatening and just being kind of loud and aggressive, just loud, that's kind of acceptable to just kind of let them vent that way.
Okay. And why is it acceptable to let them vent?
Because if they vent it out, there's a greater possibility that the situation would be resolved.
Okay, and then what else is the average officer taught? Number 4.
Yeah, that's the avoiding the topics that might agitate.
Well, I think we're one ahead. Let's look at 4 right here. What does that one say?
It says do not threaten the subject with arrest or physical harm.
Okay, why?
Basically, like the last one, you don't want to further agitate the subject to make the situation worse.
All right, and if you threaten them with physical harm, what do you train might happen?
Well, they might react negatively. They might react aggressively to that.
Okay, and then what is the 5th one on there?
That one is the avoiding topics which may agitate the subject.
And then it says, and guide this conversation towards topics which seems to ease the situation?
Yeah, that's great.
And do you have, again, special training above and beyond what the average officer has to be able to do that?
Yes.
All right. And then the last thing is to always be truthful.
Correct.
If the subject perceives deception, he or she may withdraw and further complicate the situation.
Right.
How does that work?
Basically, like anybody else, if you lie to them, you usually get a negative response to that. It's not something that's going to help the situation go for it positively. And at the same time, too, if you do lie to the subject, that's going to hurt your rapport with the subject, which is going to make the situation a lot worse for you, which might mean that you have to change out and have somebody else start doing the talking with the subject.
Okay, if you lied to me, I wouldn't want to deal with your or trust you anymore. Is that the idea?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. And again, have you had extra training in this particular aspect
Yes.
of dealing with people? All right. When you were dealing with a mentally ill citizen, what have you been trained as far as whether more than one person should talk to the person to try to de-escalate the situation?
Well, in the training, basically it's there's a primary officer that's going to be doing the talking, and there's going to be a cover. So basically, we were trained to have one person do most of the talking with the subject, try to gain a rapport with that subject, and other officers would then be covering you, which would be watching for any nonverbal cues that might need them to step in to take control of the situation.
Okay, does it help or hurt negotiations if the person who's talking to them is pointing a gun or some kind of weapon at them?
It can hurt it.
Okay, why is that?
Basically, so you're trying to gain a relationship with that individual while you're talking to them, and it's really difficult to be able to get on the same, same point of view or same topic if the one you're talking to is also pointing a gun at you while talking to you.
Okay, and so when you have a cover officer, do you ever have the cover officer go somewhere that's not standing right behind the person?
Objection leading.
I'll rephrase, Judge. Where do you have the cover officer go so that the person who's negotiating can continue to negotiate with them?
Well, we're basically kind of taught if the situation allows it to kind of be like an L formation, where the contact officer would be kind of directly in front of them, maybe a little bit off to the side, and the other officer kind of out to an angle from the individual.
All right, and why is that again?
Just to have the better control over the situation and kind of have control over the individual as well.
All right. What kinds of things have you been trained to de-escalate a situation?
Basically, kind of like how we've already talked about, trying to figure out what's wrong with the subject, what kind of services they might need. At the same time, keeping on the topics that don't agitate the subject. If you get them agitated, that's going to make things a lot harder. So you want to try to keep them calm, and you want to stay calm also.
All right. And what does the opposite? What escalates a situation with a subject?
Basically the opposite of all of that. Being aggressive, being loud, giving a lot of orders with no other option type stuff. Basically would arouse the situation.
Okay. How do you deal with somebody who is being erratic or unpredictable?
From what I've been taught, basically, keeping a good amount of distance away from the subject. Basically with that, and then having good cover and other officers there at the same time also is basically the main thing to do. Just cover, distance, and trying to calm the subject down.
What is your training about whether a person can be threatening one moment and then change and be different?
I guess, can you repeat the question a little bit?
Sure. What is your training about, well, first of all, is it a surprise that a mentally ill person might be erratic or unpredictable?
Objection speculation.
Based on this training, Judge. Go ahead.
Sorry, can you repeat it again?
Yeah, is that unusual that somebody who's suffering from a mental illness might be erratic or unpredictable?
No, that's not unusual.
Okay. And can a mentally ill person be threatening one moment and then surrender the next moment?
Yes, they can.
And have you seen that happen with your own interactions with dealing with mentally ill people?
Yes, I have.
What is the tactic for getting them from being afraid and threatening to giving up? What's the approach that you do? If I'm threatening you and angry at you and screaming at you, how do you get me from there to giving up to you?
The occasions that I've had that have gone that way, it's basically waiting it out. Part of it has a lot of them doing when they're erratic. Like I said earlier, as long as they're not like threatening with like a weapon or anything like that. As long as you keep letting them vent it, after a certain amount of time, there's a possibility that they've vented everything out, they're kind of tired out, and have came back down from that high and that aggression.
Is there a time limit on trying to get someone from being threatening and erratic to giving up?
No, not that I know of.
Okay. What is that? How many encounters with mentally ill people did you have before 2014?
Mentally ill people or people in crisis had to been hundreds, probably.
All right. And of those encounters, can you give me a range for what was the shortest time that you got it resolved and what was the longest time that you got it resolved?
With me involved, the shortest time, maybe like 20 minutes, 15 minutes.
Okay.
The longest, maybe like 2 hours,
Okay.
2.5 hours.
All right. And did you ever have an occasion over all that time with those hundreds of encounters where you were not able to successfully talk the person down and get them to give up?
No.
You were successful in every single one of those encounters?
Yes.
Objection or relevance?
Did you get a reputation in the department for being sort of the go-to?
Objection and relevance, reputation in the department.
Can I finish the question, Judge? All right. A reputation in the department for being the go-to CIT officer where there was a difficult situation.
Same objection.
Go ahead.
In my shift in my area, yes.
Okay. Did APD provide you training in how you keep yourself safe while dealing with someone who is mentally ill?
Yes.
And what did they tell you to do? We may have talked a little bit about that. What were the things that you could do to keep yourself safe?
Yeah, a lot of it is before you're showing up, knowing if there is a weapon or if they're not. Knowing that information changes a lot. If you know that they have a weapon, you're going to want to keep distance.
Okay, let me stop and
distance.
ask you about that. How does distance keep you safe?
Distance keeps you safe because the reaction time. If you're really close and somebody reacts with some sort of aggressive type of force on you, you have less reaction time. So the more distance that you have, the more time you have to react to any type of aggression or a situation that's going on.
Okay, were you trained in what was the appropriate distance to stay away from someone that had, say, a knife?
Yes, I was.
All right. And what do you do if that person, if you have the safe amount of distance and that person moves towards you? What were you trained to do?
Well, depending on the type of movement, it could be taken as a show of force or a threat of force, which you can then use some sort of force against that. You could also move backwards. You can move around. There's many different options you could take in that type of situation.
Okay, were you trained whether it would ever be appropriate for an officer to move within the danger zone to have the excuse to use deadly force on a person?
Have I ever heard of that? Or?
Relevance.
Were you trained in the use of less lethal or non-lethal options in dealing with mentally ill people?
Yes, I was.
What kinds of things are less lethal options that can be used when dealing with a mentally ill person?
The less lethal is like the OC spray or tasers or beanbag shotgun or like a taser shotgun also.
Okay, and have you used those, did you ever have to use those in the encounters where you were negotiating with people?
I have used them before, yes.
Okay, and is it, of the hundreds of times that you did it, how many times do you think you ever had to use it less than lethal?
Sustained.
At any of the times when you were negotiating with people who were mentally ill, did anybody ever have to get shot?
Objection 401.
Joint. Sustained.
Okay. Were you able to successfully negotiate all of the hundreds?
Your Honor, objection 401 and asked and answered.
Sustained.
All right. Let's talk about the events of March 16th, 2014. How did you end up being there in the foothills on that date?
I had heard the call come out over the radio. I was at the time pretty close to Sergeant Carpenter, and pretty much as soon as the call came out, I said, "Hey, do you want me to go to that?" And he said, "Yeah, let's go." And we both kind of headed over there at the same time.
All right. And did you arrive about 5:05?
I believe so.
What was the call that got put out over the radio?
From what I recall, I heard that there was 2 open space officers that were up in the foothills that had encountered a subject in the foothills that had varnished knives at the officers, and that they had drawn their guns out on the subject.
Okay, and that's how it was conveyed to you?
Yes.
During the whole hour and 10 minutes that you were out there negotiating, did anybody ever tell you that it was actually the officers who had pulled their guns first on Mr. Boyd?
No.
Okay. When Mr. Boyd, was Mr. Boyd saying things accusing the police of having attacked him first? Sure. Were there things that Mr. Boyd said about the officers having attacked him first? Try to direct him to a particular point in time of the conversation, Judge. Yeah.
Can you repeat it real quick?
Sure. And you're talking to Mr. Boyd, were there times when he's accused the officers of having attacked him first?
Yes.
And what did you think when he said that?
I really didn't understand it. I kind of thought maybe that he might have perceived it differently than what had really happened.
And nobody let you know that that's actually what had happened?
No.
Okay. Does a citizen have a right to defend himself against excessive force by the police?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Can a police officer commit aggravated assault on a citizen?
Relevance.
Who was there when you first went up and talked to Mr. Boyd?
I believe it was myself, Sergeant Carpenter, I believe Officer Rugilio, and I think there might have been maybe one other officer.
Okay, and were the open spaces officers still there too?
Yes, they were.
Okay, and so we can identify you, maybe, we have all the pictures up here. I'm not sure if you can see this. See if I can find you. I want to step down just a second and point out which one you are in this sort of array of officers. With the sunglasses?
Yes.
Okay, and your hair is redder in that picture than it is now. Okay, all right, so, and can you point out for the jury the different people that arrived with you from the Field Services Bureau? Who were there with you?
Sergeant Carpenter, Rugilio, and Fire
Okay, great, thank you very much.
And identify which officer you say one of those two.
And let me identify the 26A judge and 28A. And he identified, for the record, 25A as Sergeant Carpenter and 27A as himself. And Justin Rugilio is 29A, for the record. Thank you. Mr. Monette, we have a photograph from the scene that was taken, has been admitted as 13I5. And can you, trying to get the glare off there, can you identify that? First of all, can you identify Mr. Boyd in that picture?
Yes, I can.
And can you, on that screen right there that you have, you can point on there and it'll make a mark. So can you show where he is in this picture?
There you go.
Maybe circle him? There he is, okay. And can you show where you were in this picture?
Right there.
All right. And is this the group of officers that went up to the scene initially to deal with Mr. Boyd?
Yes.
And what weapons did you have on you? And your back is to us in this picture. Can you talk about what weapons you had when you were up there with Mr. Boyd?
Well, I'd taken my rifle up there, and on my belt I also had my handgun and the other less lethal options and tasers.
What were you doing with the rifle when you were talking to Mr. Boyd up there?
Basically took it up there for my protection and for the other officer protection.
All right, but how was it, how did you have it on your body when you were up there?
It was basically slung on my body, just hanging straight down.
Okay. When you were negotiating with Mr. Boyd, did you ever point it at him?
No.
Or did you point any weapons at him?
No.
Okay. Let me show you a second picture, which is a little bit later, I think, 13I1. And if you'll touch the bottom left of your screen twice, it'll erase those little dots. So down to the There you go. Okay. And this is at a different point in time. Again, let me get the glare off Mr. Boyd. Can you point out Mr. Boyd there, please, again? Okay. And where are you in this picture?
Right here.
All right. And can you talk about what's going on in this particular picture here?
Basically, we still got, you know, a good distance away from Mr. Boyd, and just probably just in the middle of a conversation talking with him.
All right. In both of these pictures, did you believe that you were at a safe distance from Mr. Boyd?
Yes.
Was that based on your training and experience?
Yes, it was.
And tell me who this fellow is up at the top of the picture here.
I believe that's right here.
Yes.
That's Brock Nipreth.
And what was Brock Nipreth doing up there?
He was kind of another cover officer.
Right. And was he a CIT trained officer as well?
Yes, he was, or is.
And is this configuration the appropriate configuration based on your training and the thing that you talked about before about an L shape?
Yes, it's a little off, but it's manageable.
Okay, and why do you have the person who's providing cover for you up here as opposed to down here with the people who are talking to him?
Like I said, it kind of can help a little bit with containment and control over the subject.
Even though all these people were here, who was the person primarily responsible for talking to Mr. Boyd during the hour and 10 minutes that you were there?
That was myself.
And how, was there anybody there with a beanbag shotgun, by the way?
I believe so, yes.
And how, can you go through and tell the jury how this approach worked with Mr. Boyd?
Which approach?
You talking to him.
Oh, basically, while I was side with him, it would kind of go up and down. There'd be times where I'd be able to get him to calm down, have a conversation, talk about things, and then other times he'd get up and get a little more agitated, just angry for really no apparent reason. And that's kind of how it went most of the time, is just kind of going in between those ups and downs.
Okay. And at some points, did he express anger because he said he... Can I finish the question, Judge? Did he express anger based on his perception that he'd been threatened first by the officers?
Objection, leading.
Same objection, calls for speculation.
What did he say was the source of his anger as related to the officers, the open spaces officers who'd come up there?
I believe he kind of said that he really didn't understand why we were up there. He didn't think he was causing any harm, and kind of felt like that. One of the things that he was saying was the knives that he did have, that he felt like he was protecting those. That his knives were protecting him just as much as our guns were protecting us.
Okay. Were you able to tell from the things he was saying whether or not he was mentally ill?
I could kind of get a sense that he was from the things he was saying,
Right.
and from the way he was acting, how he was kind of going up and down.
And were you able to get him to stop? Well, let me ask about two things. At some point, was there did someone say, if you cross this line, we're going to shoot you with a beanbag shotgun?
Yes, there was.
And why did that happen?
Basically kind of happened because at one point in the conversation he did get the knives, he got them out, kind of held them out, and acted like he was going to come towards us, and might have actually taken a few steps towards us.
Uh-huh.
And after that happened, I believe his Sergeant Carpenter went and said, hey, if he crosses this, you're going to beanbag him.
Okay, and you told him that too, right?
I believe I repeated it to him,
Right.
not to cross that.
And after you said that, did he ever cross that line?
No.
During the whole hour and 10 minutes that you were there, how many times did Mr. Boyd pull out his knives?
The one I can recall is just the once when I just said how he brought him out, had him pointed out, and had taken a few steps towards us.
And that's the one where you said, that brought up the beanbag comment?
Yes.
Okay, then after that, were you able to get him to put his knives away?
Yes.
How did you do that?
Just being persistent, kind of just talking to him, say, hey, you don't need to have your weapons out. Can you put them away? Can you put them down? And my main goal is trying to get him to put him down and not even have him on him completely, but he basically got to the point where he's like, I won't have him out, but I'll have him on my body still. I couldn't get him to I couldn't get him to throw him off his body or put him down.
Okay, and was there a time when he was putting his hands, he put his knives away, but he was putting his hands in his pockets?
Yeah, he put his hand in his pockets.
And were you able to get him to stop putting his hands in his pockets?
For the most part.
Yeah, and how did you do that?
The same thing, being persistent with it. Officers don't like, talking to a subject that has been had down or that's a mystery of what he has, putting their hands in their pockets because you don't know what they're capable of. There is a possibility that they could maybe have a gun or something else in there that they could be retrieving. So we like to see the hands as much as possible when that
Okay,
happens.
but how did you get him to stop doing it then?
I'm basically just repeating, hey, officers don't like, people putting their hands in their pockets. Can you please keep your hands out of your pockets? And just being persistent with that.
Okay, and then did he stop putting his hands in his pockets?
From what I recall, he stopped greatly.
After you said, cross this line, we're going to beanbag you, did he ever approach you or run at you at any time that you were out there?
I don't believe so.
And was he a danger to the officers at the distance at which you were talking to him?
No, with the knowledge of him just having knives, no.
Okay. While the field officers and CIT were talking to him, was there any reason to shoot him?
No.
And why is that?
Basically, from the distance we were at, there really wasn't a threat or a deadly force threat.
Okay. Even if he called you names?
Correct.
Even if he threatened to kill you?
Correct.
Even if he pulled...
Objection leading.
Well, was him having a knife enough for you to shoot him from that distance?
No, it wasn't.
Let's talk about what happened after the rope team arrived. Tell me how that changed things when the rope team arrived.
Basically, I was just up there still having my conversation with Mr. Boyd, and I was just doing my job until basically Sergeant Carpenter told me, hey, we're tactically retreating off this and we're moving back and letting them handle it.
Okay. When the rope team arrived, did they call Sergeant Carpenter down to talk to him?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
I think he was right there, Judge. Sure. Are you aware that the rope team called Sergeant Carpenter down?
Objection leading.
Let me show you a picture that's been admitted as State 32. EI? Okay, all right, Judge. Do you see this picture here? And if you can erase our little dots there. What's happening in that picture?
Objection calls for speculation, Your Honor.
He can testify if he knows.
Okay,
He was there.
sure.
I wasn't there, so.
Okay, you were at the top of the mountain?
Yeah, I was still talking with Mr. Boyd.
Okay, at some point, did you see Sergeant Carpenter go down to the bottom of the mountain?
I did see him kind of do it, kind of break away a couple of times.
All right.
To talk to other people.
All right, and you don't
who.
know who he went down to talk to?
No.
Okay, when he came back from being down at the bottom of the mountain, what did he tell you?
I believe at one point he kind of told me that, we're going to start moving guys out and to like an outer perimeter type position, and that we would kind of be like the last ones to be moved out.
Okay, did he tell you who had told him that they were moving the field officers and you out?
No, he hadn't told me.
All right, and let me show you what's marked as 32A, and again, can you circle for the jury where Mr. Boyd is and where you are?
Mr. Boyd's there, and that's me there.
Okay, and if you can down at the bottom of the hill, can you see down at the bottom of the hill, there's 3 people down there at the bottom of the hill?
Yes.
Can you maybe put a little arrow down towards them? Okay, and who's the last person up there with you?
Honestly, I don't know.
Okay.
I can't tell by that picture.
All right. If you can clear that, and was there a time when you got called down the hill? Let me show you what's been marked and admitted as 7C6. Does that depict you and somebody else, the unknown person, coming down the hill? That's kind of a glary thing there. Hold on a second. There you go. That might be you right there.
Yeah, it's possible.
Okay, and can you circle where Mr. Boyd is in this particular picture?
I would believe that that's him.
Okay, and after you got called down, what was Mr. Boyd doing? I'm going to show you 32E3. And you can see down there at the bottom, there's 3 people down at the bottom.
Your Honor, I object to her describing the picture. I think the witness can describe the picture.
Okay, can you describe whether Mr. Boyd was left alone by himself for a while?
To the picture, yeah, it seems like he's up there kind of on his own. There's not too many people other than the 3 down here, or
Okay.
however many are down there.
Thank you very much. Did anybody ever come up and talk to you about whether they thought it might be fruitful for you to continue talking to him before they pulled you off the mountain?
No, I don't believe so.
When you came down, well, I don't think we talked about this when we were talking about CIT. What is the practice or your training about what's supposed to happen when a CIT officer is already talking to somebody and has established rapport and somebody else comes on the scene?
Basically, the rule that they taught us in training is that if the CIT officer has a good rapport with whatever subject that they're dealing with, that most of the time that they would either stay on there, or it'd be the call of, say, like a negotiator showed up, it'd be their call if they wanted to take over or leave them on.
Okay, and are there negotiators in APD that are even more experienced than CIT officers?
Yeah, yes, there is.
What are they called?
Objection relevance.
It is, Judge, and I think we'll talk about it with the SWAT team as well. They're with the SWAT team.
It's relevant to the SWAT team, too.
Okay. Even if someone is a more experienced negotiator than you, what is the practice as far as leaving the CIT officer in place if they have a rapport with the subject?
Your Honor, it's the same objection.
Okay. If someone is going to take over from the CIT officer, what is the practice, whether it is a CNC crisis negotiator or if it's somebody else, what is the practice as far as debriefing the CIT officer who's been dealing with the person?
Objection relevance.
Go ahead.
Usually it's, it's usually common for both of them to get together and kind of talk about what kind of things have happened in the conversation, what the crisis or the CIT officer might have seen in the subject. Basically, try to give the negotiator the most information you have on the subject to them, to better for them to have a better chance of success in their negotiation.
Okay, and why is that important, to let the person taking over know what's been going on?
So they know, what's working, what's not, what might agitate the subject, what might calm the subject down. That way, so they don't accidentally do one of those things that might start agitating the subject.
Okay. Did any of these 3 people in this photograph down here at the bottom of the hill, did any of them debrief you about what had been working and what hadn't been working over the last hour and 10 minutes?
Not that I recall, no.
Did they even ask you what you'd been doing for the last hour and 10 minutes?
I don't believe so.
Do you know if they even knew that you were a CIT officer?
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for speculation.
Join Your Honor.
Are there things, in your opinion, that could have been handled differently in a way that Mr. Boyd might still be alive?
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for an opinion. It's not your qualifications.
We concur, Your Honor.
Did you still have things that you could have done with Mr. Boyd to try to talk him off that mountain?
Objection, same objection, Your Honor.
Since there is no time limit, would you have been willing to spend more time up there talking to Mr. Boyd if they had let you?
Same objection.
Join.
Board objection. What?
Relevance, Your Honor, and it calls for speculation.
With regard to that.
Okay. Was it your choice to come off the mountain, or did someone tell you to come off the mountain?
Asked and answered, Your Honor. He said Sergeant Carpenter did.
Do you know who told Sergeant Carpenter to pull you off the mountain?
Asked and answered, he said he didn't.
I don't think I've asked that question at all, Judge. Okay. Do you know who, did Sergeant Carpenter tell you who had told him to pull you off the mountain?
No.
Where were you at the time, or where were you sent after they pulled you off the mountain?
Basically, just further down, kind of like an outer perimeter type
Okay, and
spot.
can I get you to step down again and so you can show the jury where you were at the time of the shooting? Put yourself in that picture about where you were at the time the shooting happened. Okay. And what was your role at the time of the shooting, or how were they using you or not using you at the time of the shooting?
Basically, an outer perimeter is just keeping outside people from coming in.
While you were there, did you have radio contact with everybody while you were on the scene?
I believe everybody was on the same air at that time.
Did you hear them call within about 15 or 20 minutes before the shooting, call for a CIT officer to be sent to the scene?
I think I just remember hearing that.
And how did you react to them calling for a CIT officer to be sent to the scene?
Kind of like, well, I'm here type of fun.
Were you surprised? Were you surprised that they were calling for CIT officers when there were two there?
Yes, I was kind of confused a little bit.
Okay. Again, thank you very much. Were you able to see the shooting from your position?
Yes, but basically I had heard like the flashbang and then heard the shots, and I could see it, but it wasn't like great detail. I was pretty far away where you could just kind of get a sense of what's going on from the sound.
All right. After Mr. Boyd was shot, what did you do?
Objection, relevance?
Did you approach Mr. Boyd and
Same
go?
objection, Your Honor.
Okay. Can we approach Judge?